Good morning, afternoon, or evening to all of you. Thank you for attending today's webinar. My name is Ken Ross. I am the SPSP webinar coordinator and also a board member. I want to thank you all for coming today and thank you for attending the second webinar in our 2026 webinar series. As in the past and also this year, I want to thank Cedric Brand Protection for sponsoring these webinars. We appreciate their support. A couple of SPSP news items first. First, there'll be a newsletter that will be sent out this week to all of you with more detail on SPSP activities. But one of the things that I'll mention right now is that SPSP will have a booth at the ICPHSO conference, and we encourage you to stop by. There'll be some material there that might be of interest to you, and we've got a drawing for a tool from Milwaukee Tools. We appreciate their support as they did last year. And also, SPSB has a reception open to anybody free of charge Monday night, February 23rd. I think it's at 5:30. There'll be information in the newsletter about that. So things are going on with SPSB. We're continuing both the webinars. We have our certification program coming up in the fall. We've got activities at ICPHSO, and we hope you participate and consider becoming members of SPSB, which helps us even expand our programs more. Okay, on the webinar side, we've got two webinars scheduled so far. I'm working on others. In March, we're going to take off certainly during the time when ICPHSO is, and then we'll go into later March for our next program and talk about customer education programs. And I've got a speaker from Amazon, a speaker from the Baby Safety Alliance, and others to talk about their thoughts on best practices and how we can educate customers about safety issues. And then in April, I've got Rod Freeman and his folks from the Cooley Law Firm are going to give us an update on the both EU and the UK legal issues with the Product Liability Directive and GPSR and other things going on. I asked them when would be a good time to do an update because things develop at different periods of time, and they thought April would be a good time to do it. So we're going to do that. Okay, next slide. So let me introduce our speakers. You've seen in the announcement a description of them. So, and there are a couple of slides there, but that we'll show you. Rutger Oldenhouse is an expert in all things product safety in the EU, and he was a former in-house general counsel and is running several businesses now that deal with both these regulatory issues and recalls. And Geraldine Koch from the UK has been doing product safety consulting for 20 years, and despite the fact you look like you started when you were 4, I think, but and has written many of the excellent safety guidances out of the UK and involved in all safety activities. So let me go to the next slide. There's a little bit more information which you can see. Next slide, Rutger. Yeah, there we go. So there's more information on Rutger that you can look at and some various links to information that he provides there. And then next slide, Geraldine's information there and all the things that she's authored, which is really pretty incredible. And Geraldine also has been elected to the board of SPSB. We appreciate her participation. And I want to thank both of our speakers for staying up late doing this webinar at a later time. So thank you very much. Hopefully you won't be too tired. In any event, I think if you go to the next slide, Rutger, then I think I'm going to turn it over to you and I'll keep my mouth shut. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ken, also for inviting us and hosting this webinar. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody wherever you are in the world. Thanks for listening to us to this webinar. And of course, also Geraldine, thank you for helping me doing this webinar together. So in the slide, we can see the outline of this webinar's subject. So there's a lot of why, what, how, and why in it. So we start with why do you actually need technical documentation? And I will use the abbreviation TD. TD stands for technical documentation, obviously. And perhaps it's also good to mention that technical documentation and technical file is exactly the same. But I think during the presentation, I will mainly use the term technical documentation.
Rutger, I'm gonna interject one thing because I can't remember if I said it originally, because you've got some pretty detailed slides. All the slides will be posted on our website, so don't feel compelled to scroll down everything.
Absolutely.
I just want to
Yep.
make sure you knew that.
Yeah,
So go
no, that's a
ahead.
good point.
Yeah,
Ken, thanks
go ahead.
for saying that. Absolutely. So what is technical documentation? And then a slide about the GPSR, which stands for the EU General Product Safety Regulation. Why is this a game changer when it comes to technical documentation requirements? What are the key GPSR requirements with regard to technical documentation? And what does technical documentation in general look like under the GPSR? And how many technical documentations do you actually need based on your product or your models or SKUs? So a slide about that. And very important, why is risk assessment the core of the technical documentation? Then there's a slide about the broader concepts being introduced by the GPSR on product safety. And we also included a model template technical documentation that was published by the European Commission, which could be useful for some of you. And last but not least, economic operators and who does what. So why do you need technical documentation? Well, first and foremost, it ensures that the manufacturer systematically designs and places only safe products on the market. Of course, you can just buy stuff in Asia and put your brand on it and then sell it on Amazon. Well, I know many companies do that, but of course, if you are serious about selling safe products, that's not the way it's supposed to go. So it's really about having a product safety process in place. But next to that, it's also low-hanging fruit for authorities, for market surveillance authorities. But first and foremost, it's really having a process in place that allows you systematically to design and place only safe products on the market. So let me emphasize that once more. But low-hanging fruit, indeed, for authorities. So I thought it was good to perhaps give some real-life examples that I experienced. So I had a client who sold furniture. And there was actually one consumer who filed a complaint with the National Market Surveillance Authority about this product. And actually, the Market Surveillance Authority decided to pay a visit to my client to check their product safety process. And they said, yeah, it will be a routine inspection, as they called it. And well, they asked my client, okay, in advance of our visit, we would really like to see your technical documentation. And this is just one example, but it happens a lot more. There's another case about a company whose products were actually detained by the customs authority because they claimed that the declaration of conformity was not correct. So that is also an example. And typically, declaration of conformity is part of your technical documentation if your product is, let's call it a CE marked product. More on that later. And there was another case where a authority reviewed a company's technical documentation and found that the product had not been tested against the most recent version of the applicable safety standards, which can be a problem. And perhaps you heard about the Babboe recall. Babboe is a brand for cargo bikes. There was a huge recall in Europe and also some countries outside Europe. US was also included. And Babboe was actually forced to suspend the sales of all their cargo bikes due to missing technical documentation. And this was triggered by an accident. One of their models was claimed to be dangerous and without proper technical documentation. And then the Market Surveillance Authority asked for the technical documentation of all the other cargo bike models, which they couldn't hand over. It wasn't simply there. So then they said, okay, then you are not able to demonstrate that your products are actually safe. So you are no longer allowed to sell those products until you're able to demonstrate that these models are actually safe. And last but not least, there is a well-known case here in the Netherlands, where I'm based, about a company who makes electric child transport vehicles. And it's a very sad story because one of the vehicles got involved in a terrible accident. And an investigation started as a result, and the owners of the company were actually criminally charged for allegedly knowingly selling unsafe products. And the Dutch prosecutor argues, among others, that the technical documentation was inadequate, that conformity was claimed under the Machinery Directive, despite the product allegedly not meeting its requirements, and that there was uncertainty regarding the declaration of conformity. I'm actually involved in that case as an expert witness, so I cannot comment too much about it. And we are expecting the court decision by end of next week. But what all these examples actually have in common is, and what they actually clearly demonstrate, is that having technical documentation is not merely an administrative burden that can be ignored or quickly fixed once a market surveillance authority requests it. So this is hopefully a very clear explanation on the why you need technical documentation.
Can I interject one thing on that? On all these bad things that go on, that could go on, that Rutger just described. Of course, in the U.S., either the CPSC or, in the case of an accident, a plaintiff's lawyer can easily locate this information. I'm pretty sure it's all public information and readily available, and try to use it against you, even though it occurred in the EU. They're just going to try to say that you're a bad company, you don't care about safety. And even if you haven't had any problems or hardly any problems in the US, they can try to think or argue that it's just evidence that you are a bad company, and it would be hard to keep that evidence out. I think we would try, but it would be hard to keep it out. Okay.
Yeah. Thanks, Ken, for the information. Geraldine, your slide.
Yeah, hi, thank you. And please do, I can't see any questions coming in. So hopefully people, I'm sure there's lots of people there, I could see them there. If you do have any questions, Rutger and I are, here to help you. So please do put any questions in the chat. But Rutger's just given some really great examples, and you've mentioned conformity. And I think that one of the things that, in my understanding and working with businesses or working with various organizations, is this concept of conformity assessment. And that's really, really key. The example I've put on the slide here from the GPSR Article 28 is really just an example. So don't worry about the text that's on there. I know there's a lot of text in there. I'm really just pulling out that this term conformity assessment is mentioned in the GPSR. Not often. It's actually more often mentioned in regulations to do with things like toys or PPE. The new toy safety regulations in the EU, in fact, Nelly mentions it 100 times. So it's mentioned quite a lot. And I think this is what the GPSR was doing, is trying to bring people up. But this concept is really important, and I just wanted to mention it. Of course, I use Copilot, which is my best friend at the moment, but to just define what conformity assessment is, just to simplify it for you. So it's the process used to determine whether a product, service or system or person meets specified requirements, usually standards or regulations or technical specifications. In simpler terms, which is what I like, it's how organizations prove that what they produce is safe, reliable and compliant. So that is technical documentation, exactly as Rutger was just talking about. And I did an expert witness course many years ago, and the one thing I took from that course was, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. So if you're standing in that court situation and you're trying to defend, well, we did all these great things and it's over 100 different emails, or, you haven't got it organized, that's going to make it a lot more difficult for you than if you have your technical documentation, your technical file, all of your evidence in one place. And I think that's really the point we're trying to say here about how important it is. Of course, I can't do a webinar, I don't think, without mentioning this PAS. Rutger is laughing because he's like, oh my gosh, she's got this on here again. She's going on about all the time. And I guess even more excitingly, I will be in Florida in February. Hopefully some of you here on the webinar will be there also. I'm trying to get physical copies. I know it's not great for the environment, but I do love a paper copy of a standard. So I'm trying to get some that I can bring over to you. If not, come by the SPSP stand and I'm happy to talk to you about this particular PAS. Now, why am I going on about this PAS? Well, if we look at Article 14 of the GPSR, we've put it here on the screen, it says that economic operators shall ensure that they have internal processes for product safety in place, allowing them to comply with the relevant requirements of this regulation. Now, I wish they expanded on that and said, refer to PAS 7050. But of course, they're not going to do that because there are other options available. You've got other ISO guides that we put here on the slide, and there's other things that you can look at. But the reason why I'm mentioning PAS 7050 is mainly because I was part of the team that helped write it. Also, I wanted to highlight another thing that's really important about this PAS. You can see here, hopefully if you can see, I know it's very small, is it's got part 1 for businesses and part 2 for regulators. This is something that we really try and do here in Great Britain. So I'm based in London. Here in the UK, the regulators try and work with businesses. They actually have something called primary authority where they can get assured advice. That's quite unique. That doesn't happen anywhere else in Europe or anywhere else in the world, as far as I'm aware. Of course, the CPSC, they have, business departments that will help you. But this assured advice is really unique. And I think this PAS is trying to explain that also, that businesses and regulators should work together. So what Rutger was talking about, where an MSA turns up, an authority is asking a question, the most important thing you can do is work together with them to try and identify what the issue is or what the challenges are.
Totally agree, Geraldine. Thank you so much. But what is technical documentation, right? Well, in essence, technical documentation is a structured file, dossier. It's not a single document, typically. It's evidence that a product complies with EU safety and regulatory requirements. And for some, or perhaps most of you, it's well known already for harmonized, or let's call it CE mark products, which is not an entirely correct way to put it, but I think all of you will understand what we mean by that. Think about the machinery directive, toys, EMC, low voltage directive, RoHS, PPE, etc. Those are all harmonized pieces of legislation that already have this logic, this technical documentation logic embedded. So on the other hand, there are many companies that are not dealing with these pieces of law. There are many products that are only covered by the GPSR, and that is what this webinar is mainly about. Technical documentation must be kept available for at least 10 years after the product is placed on the market. And technical documentation can be in electronic format and also in form of a file, obviously composed by different documents. And regarding the last point, I think the days of multi-ring binders are pretty much over. In practice, technical documentation is usually kept digitally, depending, of course, on the type of documents involved. And even if some documents are quite large, it should be fairly easy to collect them in, for example, in a folder environment or a SharePoint environment or Dropbox or what have you. And if technical documentation is stored digitally, a tip from my side is to make sure that it will remain accessible for the entire period of 10 years. Some of my clients are using links, for example, to online product catalogs, which is very practical, but then make sure that those links still exist after 10 years. So that's just a practical tip from my side.
Just want to interject one thing here. Well,
Yep.
we're not going to talk much at all about CPSC. They have a few requirements for documentation, such as the declaration of conformity. There's the new e-filing requirements, and maybe some other things for customs. But generally speaking, there are no requirement. The CPSC focuses much more on after the fact, after you've sold the product. So they don't have requirements like this. The CPSC did consider adopting a regulation that would require various safety documents and to be kept for certain periods of time, but it never passed. So this is much more advanced than we have in the U.S. is my best recollection of the CPSC's requirements. Okay.
Thanks, Ken. It's good to know. So yeah, the GPSR is a game changer. Why is that exactly? Well, the GPSR is, first and foremost, it's a horizontal regulation. For those of you who do not know the GPSR that well, it's a horizontal regulation that applies to all non-food consumer goods. And this webinar is not about the GPSR. So if you would like to know more about the GPSR and how it's positioned also in the EU legal framework, Geraldine and I gave several webinars about the GPSR that I believe are still available online, and we will make sure that the links to those videos will be made available. Right, Geraldine?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, they're on the SEF.
Yeah, so we will make sure. So if you want to know more about the GPSR itself, then I would refer to those webinars. Yeah, and as mentioned, the GPSR really extends the technical documentation logic to non-harmonized consumer products. And when we say non-harmonized products, we mean products not covered by specific EU legislation, as I mentioned, CE marking legislation like toys, etc., as I mentioned before. And this concept was new to many companies selling pure GPSR products, so to speak. So companies that were not familiar to CE marked products. And what is important to know is that the GPSR also brings new obligations for online marketplaces like Amazon. And these platforms, for example, must have product safety processes in place and must ensure that traders who are based outside the EU using their platform have a responsible person established in the EU. That is also something newly introduced by the GPSR, which actually already existed for CE products, but is new for the GPSR. And because responsible persons must be able to verify as one of their tasks and obligations to verify technical documentation and to provide it to authorities if necessary, the responsible person requirement effectively drives the need to have technical documentation in place. And in practice, this makes marketplaces, in my opinion, a kind of gatekeeper for compliance, so to speak. And I believe it's also one of the reasons why many companies have become more concerned about technical documentation readiness. At least that is my impression. I think a lot of the companies that are selling consumer products are using Amazon. I think Amazon was really one of the triggers to basically wake them up like, yeah, you need technical documentation and you need to have a responsible person in the first place. So I think that is interesting to know. And I also think that is one of the reasons why the GPSR is a game changer. But more on that also in the other webinar about GPSR, if you're interested to learn more about that.
Just want to add here, just to clarify that as you're saying there, but the CE mark is not required for GPSR. It's one of those things that when I order something and it comes through and I see, a CE mark on a product that doesn't require the CE mark, it really irks me. Just please don't think it means that you put it on everything, because you don't. And if you're not sure, then it's quite easy to get that information or contact us and we can help you.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are the key GPSR requirements when it comes to technical documentation? Well, indeed, the GPSR says you should draw up technical documentation, which should contain the necessary information to prove that those products are safe. Again, this is basically a repetition of one of the previous slides. But it should be based on an internal risk analysis. I think this is new. And the amount of information and the level of detail should be proportionate to the complexity of the product and the possible risks identified. So there is flexibility in that sense. And it should contain a list of the relevant European standards that you used, or other elements used. If there are no relevant standards, perhaps there are other elements used to meet the general safety requirements. Now, I think the third bullet point is an interesting one. The amount of information and level of detail should be proportionate to the complexity of the product and the possible risks identified. So, for example, if you have a picture frame, it's a very simple, not complex product. But if you take a bicycle, for example, a regular bicycle, not an e-bike, but a regular bicycle, it's a completely different type of product. And it comes with a lot of components, for example, and with a lot of risks that you need to think about. Or think about childcare products that are not covered by other harmonized legislation. So here you can see that really depending on the type of product, the technical documentation and what's required to compile in that technical documentation can be completely different. To start with the risk analysis, by the way. So what does technical documentation generally look like under the GPSR? And this is, I'm basically helping you. This is a quote from the guidance document that was published not too long ago by the European Commission. It basically says the technical documentation should include a general description of the product. That's not too complicated. The essential characteristics of the product that are relevant for assessing its safety, for example, its chemical components, etc., and where appropriate with regard to possible risks related to the product, an analysis of the possible risks related to the product and the solutions adopted to eliminate or mitigate such risks, a list of relevant European standards, as we already mentioned before. In the absence of relevant standards, other elements also already mentioned before. So this is, again, a repetition of one of the previous slides, but this is basically what it says. And again, taking a picture frame or a bicycle as an example, you can imagine that the technical documentation of those products will really look different. And I already spoke about it before. So
the question for you, go back. It says where appropriate with regard to possible risks. What does that mean? Where appropriate?
Yeah, so then we go back to the previous slide. So it really depends on the type of product. What is proportionate to the type of product? If it's a picture frame, I mean, how would the risk analysis look like for a picture frame, right? As compared to, for example, a bicycle. It's completely different. So is it really necessary to do a very thorough risk analysis for a picture frame, for example? Maybe not if it's a traditional picture frame, but what, and we will speak about it later, what if it's What if it's connected to your phone? What if it's connected to an app? Then it's a completely different story. And you're dealing with online, with Internet of Things, with software. So it really depends on the type of product and what kind of risks and how you want to mitigate those risks are involved.
Okay.
So, am I the right slide? Yeah, I think so. So, and perhaps we missed that in my introduction slide. I wanted to also tell you about the authorized representative services that I'm offering with my company Europe. And many questions that I get as the authorized representative is actually, yeah, how many technical documentation do we need? Which is a very good and fair question, right? So once again, I took the GPSR guidance document, and it says the following: the technical documentation is to be prepared with respect to each product or product model, not individual units thereof. However, if the individual units of a product or product model are produced with different features that may impact their safety, for example, different color, different composition, different functionalities, that makes them specific products, and specific technical documentation is required for each of them. So this is in the GPSR guidance document. So I think it really depends on the type of product, how many and model, how many technical documentation you need. I think different color, I think, is an interesting one. So I do not know many companies that make separate technical documentations, for example, for a bicycle or for whatever product, because it has a different color. But then again, for example, looking at textiles, I'm thinking about chemical risks. I'm thinking about azo dyes in, for example, black, blue, and red colored textile, where there is a higher risk for azo dyes that may exceed regulatory limits. So I can imagine that you take a different approach with textiles, and you really want to make sure and demonstrate in your technical documentation that you took samples of all the colors that are covered by the technical documentation and make sure that they are tested properly. But if you ask me, I think you can still cover that in one technical documentation. But maybe the authorities would disagree, but then I think it's more a matter of copy-paste the technical documentation. But it's interesting, and it also shows that you really need to think how a feature could impact a function or a risk of your product. And I think that is the essential message of this slide. What is also important... Sorry, please.
So I was just going to say, and I think to add there, that this comes back to the kind of conformity assessment concept, if you think about it, and it's about, can you defend it if you're questioned? So say market surveillance is looking at a blue teddy bear and all of your documentation is based on a red teddy bear. As far as they're concerned, your product hasn't been tested. So you need to have evidence to show how that relates, or that you've just tested, this is what the color does, this is the difference in the color. You have to be able to explain it and justify it. And I've seen it so many times with situations like that. So it's really important to ensure.
Thanks, Geraldine. That's really a very good and important comment. What's also important is, and this is also, you can also see that in the guidance document, is that after placing the product on the market, you should keep the technical documentation up to date. So, for instance, a change in the composition of the product should be reflected in the technical documentation. I think it's an important note to be made here. So why is risk assessment the core, of technical documentation? Well, let me quote Article 5 of the GPSR, which I think is the most essential article of the GPSR. Economic operators shall place or make available on the market only safe products. That's really the core of the core of the core of the GPSR, right? So what does safe product mean? It means any product which, under normal or reasonable foreseeable conditions of use, including the actual duration of use, does not present any risk or only the minimum risk compatible with the product's use, considered acceptable and consistent with high level of protection, blah, 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 blah. I think, first of all, not present any risk is impossible. So for me, that is just doesn't make any sense to put in a law. There is always residual risk, whatever. So it doesn't really matter. Doesn't really make sense. But the minimum risks compatible with the product. So here you can see the safe product is if it's only presenting the minimum risks that are acceptable. And a dangerous product means any product which is not safe. Point. Full stop. So a proper risk assessment ensures a comprehensive understanding of product risk before placing the product on the market, and ideally already during the design and the development of the product, right? And ideally, it identifies users, use environments, and exposure scenarios, and covers intended use, reasonably foreseeable use, and foreseeable misuse. It demonstrates how applicable legislation and safety standards address the risks, highlights any residual risks, and defines additional controls. And risk reduction typically follows the safety hierarchy. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, or if you are known to the safety hierarchy, but it's first and foremost safety by design, then safety through safeguards, and then the residual risk, safety through information, using methods that fit the product's complexity and also the relevant regulatory framework. Well, we can talk for hours about this, but that is not what the webinar is about. However, the good news is, Geraldine, over to you.
Yeah. Like you said, risk assessment, one of my favorite topics, and we can talk about it for hours. But luckily, the wonderful SPSP team have already got a recording on risk assessment from roughly this time last year. So you can have a look at that there and get the video and the slide deck. I know there are a few questions that have come in, so I might just take a minute, if that's okay, Rutger, if you don't mind. Yep. I'm gonna pick a few. Basically, somebody's asking here about chemical exposure. And the thing I love about doing these webinars with the SPSP team and the attendees, they're very specific. So unfortunately, I think that it's very difficult to answer it because it's case by case, but I just wanted to highlight. So the question is regarding chemical exposure in consumer products. There are chemical requirements in EU, REACH or whatever it may be. But the one thing I do want to mention is the delegated regulation 2024-3173. And within that, what it talks about is what's assumed serious risk. So if you have a chemical non-compliance, the regulators, the market surveillance authorities may assume it's serious risk. So it's really important for you to do a risk-based assessment on the chemicals and to manage that. And I know that's very generic what I'm saying. Feel free to reach out to us directly if we can help you on that. But chemicals is quite a complex topic. And just to pick up another one very quickly, somebody's asked about PAS 7050 and then the ISO 10377 and 10393. Just to mention, you can download, I don't think I said it before, you can download PAS 7050 free online. You have to take from these documents what works best for you. You know, I, of course, think PAS 7050 is the best, but it might not be the best for your organisation. So you have to have a look at the documents that are out there and what suits your needs. So I just wanted to address a few of those, but maybe we'll carry on and try and get to the rest at the end, Rutger. Thank you.
Yeah, excellent. No, thanks. And this was really hot off the press. I just read it today, actually. And of course, this is not a general product safety regulation product, but I thought it was interesting to share this with regard to safety by design, right? We see all these fancy door handles on electric cars. And actually, China is now the first who bans these hidden car door handles due to safety risk. Because, well, there have been terrible accidents where the car caught fire, people were inside, people were trying to rescue them, tried to open the door, but they were not able to open the door for whatever reason. So China is now the first country to ban these type of hidden car door handles. Safety by design.
Well, I hadn't heard of that. I thought it was just me that couldn't figure out how to open the car door there, because I always struggle when I see those. But yeah, that makes sense. Wow.
No, exactly. And I just read it today in the news, so I thought, yeah, well, why not include it in this webinar, right? Okay. Um, yes, the broader concept of product safety and why that's important also in terms of risk assessment, because under the GPSR, product safety explicitly includes protection of health. And by that, the General Product Safety Regulation aligns with the World Health Organization definition of health, which means not only physical, but also mental and social well-being, not only the absence of injury. So risk assessments must therefore also consider potential impacts on mental health and well-being. And another important note, and I already mentioned it before, but cannot stress it enough, the General Product Safety Regulation also applies to software, not only hardware. It's not in the GPSR. It was in the draft versions, but it was taken out. Webinars and also in information that they shared is that software is also included under the scope of the General Public Safety Regulation. So if you manufacture, sell, trade products with software, it should also be included in your technical documentation, in your risk analysis, first and foremost. Right. So, and here is the wonderful model template. It's a very easy and straightforward or very simple model. It's not compulsory to use it. It's just an example. I can tell you by experience that some companies are really happy to see it, because if you don't have anything in place, which you're definitely not the only one who is in that position, if you have to start from scratch, and you really have no idea where to start, they were happy to see this template, and it really made them start. So in that sense, I can actually recommend having a look at it. If you really have no idea where to start, have a look at this template, and hopefully it will help you. Also considering the time. Yeah, technical documentation, Floris. I think this is your slide, Geraldine.
Yeah, just very quickly, and I don't know if Ken wants to say something there, but somebody's asked a question about the DOC, the Declaration of Conformity. So under GPSR, you do not need a DOC. You would need it under other products. But the point, what I did in this slide as well, because the previous one we got from the Commission when they did their webinar, which is a great webinar, it's available online, you can view it if you like, is this is looking at the toy regulation, and in the annex of that regulation, like PPE and the other pieces of legislation that are out there, it just gives you an idea where to start. That was all we were trying to do, is just give you a bit of inspiration, because sometimes people just get stuck and don't know where to start. But you do not need a DOC, just to clarify.
No, and perhaps to add on that, Geraldine, I think it's important to stress that if your product is covered by toys regulation or machinery directive, the obligations on technical documentation of the GPSR are not applicable to your product. So if your product is covered by a harmonized EU legislation, you should refer to that piece of law where it says you need to have technical documentation. The technical documentation should include this and this and this and this, just like this example is shown by Geraldine. And you don't need to bother anymore about the General Product Safety Regulation, because that section is not applicable if your product is covered by specific EU law.
And that answers another question. Sorry, Ken, because I'm just trying to address the questions, because somebody said, would a consumer product that is covered by CLP, I'm not an expert on CLP, just to clarify that, but they're saying, would a consumer product that's covered by CLP regulations require technical documentation under GPSR? I think would follow whatever CLP is telling you to do.
Can you tell us what CLP means?
Oh, sorry, the classification and labeling of products, right? Put on the spot. It's chemical requirements, so it's very specific. It's not under GPSR. It's a different thing. But I think the point of that there is that if there's another legal framework that's applicable to your product, it's important that you follow that the lex specialis point of that. You've got to follow that specific, unless it doesn't cover everything. But that's a very specific question, and feel free to message us directly with more details on the product.
It's a good question.
Good
it's a very
question.
relevant question. Absolutely.
Let me interject one thing here. One, we'll try to get to all. Hopefully, we can finish the slides and still get to the questions. If we don't get to your question, the last slide has all of our email addresses. Just email whoever you want to ask the question if we don't quite get to it. I apologize if that's the case. One other thing, these documentation requirements are a double-edged sword in the US, at least in product liability litigation. The more you write down all this stuff, the more somebody can come in and nitpick you and criticize you and say you did something wrong, you should have done something different. So while I fall on the side of more documents are better to justify the safety of your product, many product liability defense lawyers in the United States hate risk assessment. They don't want you to write this down, because if you write it down, it gives the plaintiff expert an opportunity to come in and say you should have done something different and you did something inadequate. So the answer is more, you got to do all this in the US, I believe, and of course in EU and UK, but you got to be careful how you write it. So that's I'll stop.
Yeah, that's a very good comment, Ken. Absolutely. So, and we're almost done with the webinar. I think this is the last, almost the last slide, last but not least, economic operators and who does what, right? So we have manufacturers, we have importers, we have authorized representatives, we have distributors, we have an EU responsible person, all terms that you can find in the GPSR under the definition of economic operator, and who's doing what when it comes to technical documentation. Well, first and foremost, it's the manufacturer who's ultimately responsible for drawing up and keeping up to date and making technical documentation available to market surveillance authorities for the 10-year period. And perhaps good to add that, and sometimes I get questions about, okay, what is manufacturer? Is it the supplier in Asia who actually manufactures the product? No, it's the manufacturer who puts his name and its brand and its details on the product, who is the manufacturer of the product. What if, as a manufacturer, you're not based in the EU? So if you sell products in the EU through importers, then those importers will be responsible not to draw the technical documentation, but each importer who places the product on the EU market must verify before placing on the market that the manufacturer has complied with the TD obligation and must keep a copy. So the importer must keep a copy of the technical documentation and keep it available for 10 years. So it's each importer for the products they import. It's not one single, if you have only one importer, then it's that importer. But if you have several importers, which is often the case, then each of that importer has this duty, has these tasks. So authorized representative. So the manufacturer may delegate, it's not mandatory, but he may delegate specific technical documentation related tasks to an authorized representative via a written mandate. And the authorized representative must then, among others, provide technical documentation / information to authorities upon request to demonstrate safety and inform the manufacturer if a product is suspected to be dangerous. So General Product Safety Regulation determines some minimum tasks that an authorized representative should do if you appoint an authorized representative. But in addition to that, you can add more tasks to that. That depends on the manufacturer, but it always needs a written mandate. Distributors actually do not have direct obligations to create or verify or keep technical documentation. But when it becomes a bit complicated is if a distributor also imports your product, then it's actually an importer. And then the obligations of importers start to apply. And I regularly see that companies are not aware of it, or at least distributors are not aware of it. They think I'm a distributor, but then I ask them, okay, how does the supply chain look? Are you actually importing the product straight from into the EU, and then they say yes, and then you are importer. So that comes with additional obligations under the General Product Safety Regulation when it comes to, amongst other, technical documentation. There's more, but also technical documentation. If you are a, excuse me,
if you,
yes,
for the EU responsible person,
I was just about to start about the responsible person.
Yeah, they must regularly check compliance, provide documented evidence. If they don't do that, who's responsible? Are they responsible, or is it the manufacturer who hired the responsible person?
It's the responsible person. But perhaps first, a little bit of background when you need a responsible person, because people often mix up, for example, the terms authorized representative and responsible persons. They think it's the same. Well, it's not. If you're a manufacturer based outside the EU, selling products in the EU, you need an economic operator who is based in the EU to be your responsible person. Now, if you have an importer, by default, that importer is your responsible person. You don't need to do anything for that. He is a responsible person. And whether he knows it or not, and I can tell you most of them do not know, but they are a responsible person. You can also appoint an authorized representative. And in addition to the minimum tasks that are specified in the General Product Safety Regulation, you can appoint the authorized representative as a responsible person. And then additional tasks will be there. And yes, the responsible person is responsible, as it already mentioned. And so they should be aware of that if you act as a responsible person.
Okay. Yeah, I got a question right at this point. Is an online marketplace a distributor under the GPSR?
Yeah, could be. Depends on. I mean, online platforms have different business models. If they are the importer of the product and sell it on their own title, then I believe they are a distributor.
Okay. We'll talk about online marketplaces, because under the Product Liability Directive, and this we'll talk about in April, because the Product Liability Directive was modified to make it clear it included online marketplaces. So
yeah, but also under the new Product Liability Directive, authorized representatives, but also responsible persons, they can be held liable as well. So that is an important thing to know. And that is also newly introduced. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think this is then I think the last slide, because yeah, of course we have Geraldine. So my question to Geraldine is, how about the UK and the requirements of having technical documentation there? We already briefly talked about it, but I think also the audience would be interested to hear more about that.
I'll try and do this quickly. We haven't got much time left, which I'm going to be honest with you, I'm quite relieved, because talking about EU exit is not something I want to spend too much time talking about. But really quickly, I think it's important to understand that you've got Great Britain and then UK. So we've got Northern Ireland, which is still applicable. You know, the EU requirements are applicable in Northern Ireland. Fundamentally, Great Britain, we are still following the previous GPSR. There are requirements in there, in my opinion, for documentation. I've pulled it out here and put it on the slide, but it's not as clear as it is in the new GPSR. So we're still working on the previous version of the GPSD, basically what it was before. But we do have some laws that have come out. We've got the Product Safety and Metrology Bill or Act, which has come out, and we are waiting for more information, which is probably why Rod wanted to do it in April. So hopefully we'll find out more in April, and he can update on that. So I hope that answers that question, and please do email us directly. I wanted to clarify the CLP question, because I've got a stationary item here, and this is what CLP is. So it's about the marking that's on the product. Yeah. So if I have, and this is what I find difficult when I'm put on the spot in these webinars, and I get quite nervous, because we need specific examples, which please feel free to message us about. So if you have a pen, it would be applicable under GPSR, but the classification, the labeling and the packaging may have to have depending what's in it, in the ink, it may come under CLP as well. So you'll be looking at both. So I hope that addressed that very technical question. We had another question, which I'd love to pick, and I'm being greedy because I'm taking the questions. Are you aware of the laws that regulate Christmas baubles, particularly in cases where they are unsafe and result in the injury to a child? This is one of my little things I love to talk about, because Christmas decorations or seasonal decorations are exempt from the toy safety regulations. I need to double check the new one actually. So quite often it's under GPSR, but therefore they have products that are not that safe and could be better. It would be GPSR that would be regulating those Christmas decorations. And if there was an injury, it could be that, depending, product liability, etc. There could be other laws at play, but GPSR is definitely there, and I would highly recommend a risk assessment is done.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
here,
okay.
last slide, some useful links, the guidelines that I already spoke about. You can find the link here. And if you would like to know more about specifically CE mark products, you can also refer to the Blue Guide, which is an excellent source of information.
Okay, let me ask a question and just mention what we'll do with the questions, and then see if we have time. There are 4 minutes left that we could, if you all stick with us. Can the importer be designated the responsible person if they are based outside of the EU?
No.
Okay, that's
If
easy. So both of you, if you want, we got a lot of questions, so I won't apologize, because thank you very much for the online all these questions, but we're kind of adding them, answering them sporadically. So I apologize for that. What I may do is just we'll either email us or whoever you think can answer the question with your question if we didn't get to it. And what I'll probably do is we'll print them out and organize the questions, and maybe I'll ask Geraldine and Rutger for quick responses, and then we can post them on the website. So that, because it's hard, it's like all over the place here, and a lot of really good questions. So we don't want to make light of them, but we don't know how many questions will come in until we do the presentation. So we got a bunch of them. So if they're in the remaining 3 minutes, do either of you want to tackle another question or two here?
Just want to add to that because we want to be as helpful as possible. We love doing these webinars, but if you can be specific, because sometimes when they're very generic, it's very difficult for us to answer. So if you have an example, say, I have a product that is a this or that, just give us an idea of what it is, then hopefully we can answer your question a bit better if it's not so generic. But that's just my ask. I don't know, Rutger, if you want to add anything or take on a specific question, but.
Okay. Well, and here's one for you, Geraldine. Is the UK still following all of the EU's regulations, or do they have differences?
How much time have we got?
2 minutes.
It depends. It depends on the product, right? So it basically depends. The legal framework, I'm sorry to be vague, but it depends on the product.
See, and Geraldine didn't even go to law school, and she gives a good lawyer-like answer. That's all we always respond. It depends. Well, okay. Let's see. Well, again, there are a bunch of other questions, so we don't want to. I don't want to make light of any of them. So maybe we'll just call it a day here. And again, we'll post the slides. We'll post a link to the program, and in a short period, a relatively short period of time, we might be able to get some more answers to the questions. But feel free. Oh, I'm sorry, Rutger, go to the last slide here. Well, you got the questions and then the last slide. No, well, not your. Yeah, there we go. So that'll be in there. So the email addresses are right there. It shows where the slides and the material will be posted, or you can email SPSB and they will forward it on to me. So one way or another, our goal here is to get you at least interested in the topic and enough information in a short hour, and then have you know who people are who can answer these questions in more detail. But I appreciate you all sticking around, and thank you, Geraldine. Thank you, Rutger, again for staying up late and for providing this information. And thank you all for your great questions. And we'll keep on with this, and we'll probably have an update on this maybe later this year, early next year, and see where we're going with all this. This is never-ending conversation about the regulations as they develop. So thank you all very much. I appreciate it, and have a good day.
Thanks, everybody.